Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cooper-Hewitt. I'm Matilda McQuaid, Deputy Curatorial Director, and one of the curators for the exhibition Color Moves, Art and Fashion by Sonia Delaunay, along with Susan Brown, who's here as well. And I hope everyone's had the great opportunity to see the exhibition, and if you don't, come back. I think it'll be a revelation for a lot of people who either are not familiar with Sonia Delaunay, who are, but certainly are not familiar with this work that's on display upstairs. So tonight we have a special evening, a conversation among friends. Two of the major lenders for the exhibition, Elaine Lustig Cohen and Matteo de Monti, will be conversing with Petra Timmer, who's a contributor to our catalog, and she will also be the moderator. So before I hand it over to Petra, I just want to thank profusely some of our funders for the exhibition, which include the Horace W. Goldsmith Foundation, the Kobe Foundation, the Anna Maria and Stephen Kellen Foundation, Aaron Krantz Fund, Esme Uzdan Exhibition Endowment Fund, Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, Lisa Roberts. Furthermore, a program for the J.M. Kaplan Fund, the Consulate General of the Netherlands, and the Felicia Fund. So you can see it was an incredible collaboration to get the show up on the second floor. So Petra Timmer, I want to just make a brief introduction to her. She's a freelance curator, writer, and researcher, and author, and co-director of the Time Amsterdam Cultural Consultants since 2007. She's organized exhibitions for numerous cultural institutions, including the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Institute of the Netherlands in Paris, the Kuala Lumpur National Gallery, and the Metropolitan Museum in Manila. She is the author of numerous monographs and articles in the field of visual arts and design, including several articles on Sonia Delaunay's textile design work. And her doctorate, which she will tell you a little bit about in art history, was on the marketing of avant-garde design. So please welcome Petra Timmer. Thanks.
Nice of you. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here, and I'll moderate this evening for you, and we're going to have a talk with Elaine Lustig Cohen and Matteo de Monti. But before I ask them to come here, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. And also, after that, I'd like to take you through several pictures I have of Sonia. Long life, and I'll tell a little bit about it. I think most people know about Sonia, but maybe there are some people who don't know very much about her. So that's the reason I'd like to start with that. But about myself, I'm an art historian, and I studied art history in Utrecht in the 1970s and 80s. And I got interested in design. And so my professor said, wouldn't it be nice for you to research the history of the firm Metz and Co in Amsterdam? Because there's going to be an exhibition on functionalism in the Stedelijk Museum, and Metz used to be a very important commissioner for functionalist architects and designers, and promoted this functionalist interior in Holland in a very special way. Well, I got very interested, and I contacted the firm of Metz, the direction. They agreed that I could see their archives, but I also went to a certain Mrs. de Leeuw, Gina de Leeuw. She was she still is, the widow of Mr. Henk de Leeuw, and he used to be the owner of Metz and Co, and also his father, Joseph de Leeuw. They were the commissioners of these architects and designers. And she appeared to have a large collection, an archive of her husband. And so I came to her place where she lived in the Netherlands. And she showed me that afternoon boxes with a lot of samples of textile, of fabrics. And at that time I was primarily interested in this functionalist furniture of Metz and Co. But then she showed this to me, and it was a dazzling experience. All these colors, all these patterns, among them a lot of Sonia Delaunay, which I didn't know at that moment, but a lot of other designers too. And then I realized, the night after, I had a dream about it. I couldn't sleep because it was still dazzling in my mind. And I thought, well, this thesis is not only going to be about furniture, it certainly has to be about textiles, about fabrics, and also about Sonia Delaunay. So that's how I got interested in this fabric part of Metz and Co. and in Sonia Delaunay. And some years later, I found in the attic of Metz and Co. a lot of samples, by accident actually. I found a lot of samples of designs, of fabric designs. Among them also a lot of Sonia Delaunay's. And at that time I knew exactly what was Sonia and what was other designers. So, and by that time I knew her eldest son, Matteo de Monti. And the plan was born to make an exhibition about Sonia's designs. So we went to Paris and we saw her archives. We went to the Bibliothèque Nationale and we read her diaries, her extensive diaries. And so, well, that's how I became a Sonia Delaunay specialist. The exhibition was in 1992 in the Stedelijk Museum. And afterwards, it was a very successful exhibition, and a lot of other museums were interested in Europe. It has traveled to several places in Germany, in France, in Paris. It was in Belgium, it was in Porto, in Portugal, it was in Spain, and now it is here in a different way, but still it's the exhibition of Sonia, and there's a great part of Metz fabrics in it. So I'm very happy that this has happened. But this is my relation to Sonia Delaunay, and that's how I got to know her work. Now I'd like to go to, I have this on my laptop, several photos of Sonia Delaunay. Now I have to look for this thing and see if this is going to work. Let me see. I have to put on my glasses. Yeah, there it is. Well, perhaps some of you know this photo. This is a very cute photo of the little, Sarah Stern. She was Stern. She was born in 1885 in Gradišk. That's a town not very far from Odessa in the south of Russia. And she was born in a lower class family, but at the age of, I think she was 5, she was adopted by an uncle of hers who was a very wealthy lawyer in St. Petersburg. And this is a photo in St. Petersburg where you can see her as a very, lively child. And mind you, what happened to her? This must mean something for her character. This is an essential moment in her life, I think, because it was a great change of class that happened to her, from a lower class to higher classes. She had governesses who taught her English, French, and German. It was a change of climate, a completely different surrounding for her. And she was never to see her family again, except for one time her father, many years later. So it's a girl with a very strong character, a survivor, no nostalgia, and she was not sentimental. And I think you can see it already in the picture. It's a psychology which I shouldn't do that perhaps, but still I think you can see it in this little determined girl. These characteristics she was going to keep all her life. Here we see a photo of Sonia. I think she's about 16 or 17 here, still in St. Petersburg. She is dressed up, I think, as Cleopatra, and is for a party. And I have another one. Yeah, here you can see her face a little better. It's about the same age. I think she is 17. A very talented girl, not only in mathematics and in history, but also in painting and drawing. And that was very conspicuous. So a friend of this uncle, Henry Terk, said to him she should go to an art academy, and she was sent to Karlsruhe. She wanted to go to Karlsruhe to get an education in art. And when she was there, she got very interested in what happened in Paris, which of course was the center of the art world then. Interested in Impressionism and Fauvism, that is what she wanted to find in Paris. She went to Paris, and what she also found was Cubism. And she found all the other artists of the avant-garde. She formed part of them. And she met Robert Delaunay. Robert Delaunay, the young painter of the same age, also born in 1885, French, of course. And he was working on the perception of color. That was really the thing that he was going for. He was discovering new ways into abstraction. And Sonia went along with him on this way to find these new ways, and they called it simultaneanism. And it was about color and how colors work together, how colors moved, you might say. They married in 1910. Well, this is another stage of her life, not very long afterwards. This is about 1913. And here you see her in a robe simultanée. This is a dress she made herself. At least it's kind of a patchwork on a dress with all kind of color swatches, fabric swatches in different colors. And what she made was kind of an abstract design, an abstract painting on her dress. A few years before, she had started to work in, to do needlework, to do embroideries, and to do some kind of patchwork, making like a collage in swatches of cloth. And well, maybe some more traditional art historians or art critics would say it's a step backwards because she turned to the minor arts. But actually it was a great step forward for her, because this was for her the way to bring her art to the public, to the streets, to bring her art, to liberate it from the canvas, to liberate it from the frame, and to bring it to life, to, well, as I said, to the street, to the public. It could be seen there. And that's a very important mission in her life, and that's what we're going to see also the rest of this evening, and what you see in this exhibition. A true mission is the transformation of daily life by color. This is a few years later. This is the period of the boutique simultanée. We are here around 1925, 1924, more or less. You can see her in her studio in Paris with her textile designs that are just behind her. And this is the period that she was very successful. She employed seamstresses, embroiderers to make her fashion and to make her textiles. Fashion and fabrics that she sold to celebrities of her time. And her fabric patterns were researches into color effects. And they had the same level as her paintings. She was not painting in this period, but for her, painting or designing was the same kind of research into the effects of color. Well, this is again some years later. We see her around, I think, 1930. She's wearing a shawl of her in a design of her own. And she's still very successful, but this is going to change because in 1929 it's the big crash, and then her boutique simultanée, she had to close it down. She had to fire her seamstresses and her embroiderers, but she continued to design fabrics. And let me see if, yeah, that's in this picture. We are now around 1935. You can see her in another studio. She lived in the Rue Saint-Simon. She is here with two trainees, or élèves, as she called them. And she's still designing many fabrics, more than many people thought, because she still had to live from these designs. And in this time, in this period, Metz and Co was one of her many commissioners, and I think they were their biggest commissioner at this time. Well, another stage is after the war. In 1941, her husband Robert had died. They were in the south of France because of the war. They couldn't stay in Paris. He died of cancer in 1941, and after the war, she went back to Paris, and she went back to painting again. She was still in the Rue Saint-Simon where she lived, but still she designed fabrics. It went on. Let me see, this is some years later, I guess. She's still in her studio with her brushes, and she has become a celebrity herself with solo exhibitions in Paris and in other places over the world, in Europe, I mean. Some years older, well, becoming really a grand old lady. This must be, I think, in the 60s. And here we see her. This must be in the 70s, and she's really a very old woman here, but as you can see, she's still holding the brushes. Of course, it was for the photo, but I think she was still, until her latest day, she was painting, designing, but still going strong. And this is my last picture, and now we see, if you remember the little girl that we saw in the beginning, and here is she, the old woman. This is 1 year before she died. This must be 1978. And, well, this is the very late Sonia Delaunay. And that's where I want to end this little overview of the life of Sonia Delaunay. And now I'd like to ask Matteo de Monti and Elaine Lustig Cohen to come and sit here. Well, to start with Matteo de Monti. I mentioned the name De Leeuw, and De Leeuw is, as I said, they were the directors of Metz and Co. Matteo is the son of Henk de Leeuw, the eldest son of Henk de Leeuw, and grandson of Joseph de Leeuw. And, well, Matteo, you have known Sonia almost all your life. And can you perhaps tell me when did you meet her actually? What was your first meeting with her?
First time I met Sonia was in 1956, and I know this exactly because when I was starting to prepare, working on all the designers of Metz and Company, including of course Sonia Delaunay, in the early 80s when I met Petra Timmer, who was studying all the work of my father and my grandfather, and we were going through all the fabric books and the designs, which had been for about the last 10 years since my father had died and had sold the company in 1973, were banned to the cellar, and it was lying next to the washing machine and the boiler. And it was actually forgotten because going through these fabric books with my father, he said, "Who is interested in this anymore? Nobody. This is of the past," and Metz and Company had become history for us. But when I met Petra and when we saw that there were these treasures hidden next to the boiler and the washing machine, we sort of started to look at all these things. Then I started to catalog all these things. We started to work on Sonia's life and really research it. We were together in the Bibliothèque Nationale reading the diaries that she started in 1933 at a period where she was working extensively for my grandfather and my father. My grandfather met her in 1925 at the Grande Exposition des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, where she was showing her boutique simultanée, and he instantly had bought things from her. And in 1930, and this is not a coincidence, my grandmother died, And suddenly, at the same time, when there was the crash at Wall Street and Sonia had to shut down her boutique simultanée, my grandfather was in Paris all the time. And there the relation started not only as a business relation in commissioning the fabrics, but also a great friendship developed, which indeed, when I read later in her diaries, my grandfather did ask her to marry, and it didn't happen. But otherwise, I don't think I would be here now.
No.
It was the beginning of a big collaboration, which my father continued not only after the war, but was very much part of it before the war, because he was head of the fabric department. Now, I make this long introduction because Sonia was a big friend of the family, and I've known her my entire life. Her fabrics were fed into me when I was a baby, and I was even at her funeral. So it's a long span. But I remember distinctly meeting her for the first time, and that was on the 6th of May in 1956, when I was with my parents in Paris, and my father told us, we're going to visit Sonia Delaunay, and now you behave. I was there with my sister. I was under 4 years old, about 3.5 years old, and behave. But I used to go to painter studios. There was a famous Dutch painter called Bart van der Lek, and as a small child I was in his studio, and I knew you just had to shut up when you were in somebody's studio. So we were at best behavior, and for me, Sonia, who was in her 70s, but she was of course ancient and old, which she actually wasn't at that time. But I met this lady with, for me, a graveling voice, and I didn't speak any French, and she spoke English and French, but for me it was sort of Russian, probably. But the distinctive memory I have, and it is extremely important for what I later did with all her work for the rest of my life, is that I stood at the top of her studio, and she had a duplex studio with a white staircase going down. And I was standing at the top of this staircase, and there I saw these huge paintings of Robert Delaunay, these big circles that she had. She had plants up to the ceiling, and there was this explosion of colors that I had in my head that I nearly fell down the stairs. And that enormous intensity of colors and of her work and of Robert's work, but it's very intertwined, has stayed with me and made an enormous, enormous impression that I have loved her work ever since. So the reason why I know exactly this date is that I researched her diaries and I looked up my family, and there is a huge, huge dossier on my family in her diary. I've come to know a lot of things that I never knew, that I never asked my father, that he never told me about, that I didn't ask Sonia at a time that I could have asked, but we were talking about lots of other things and not about the love affair of my grandfather or whatever.
Of course
but
not.
Of course, we were all supposed to be very discreet, but also many, many other things. And that's why I saw exactly in her diary, I know it by heart in French, but I don't know it by heart in English, but where she wrote on May the 9th, 1956, after 4 o'clock, the Delaus came. Gina, my mother, with her hair cut short, really very beautiful, gay, merry, happy to live. He, a lot more energetic. The children, not good looking, but intelligent. Especially the little one of 4 years, Mathieu. By the way, he is the only one that counts. One watches only him and addresses only him. He is the future Monsieur Metz. The children went to the table and behaved like American children, meaning badly. Afterwards, they were given pencils and paper, and things improved. And I discovered many, many of these gems in her diary. And indeed, there were many events of my family, which of course I didn't know, but saw through her eyes. In her diary, she could be extremely critical. She could be very nice too, but she was somebody with very, very strict opinions. She was a very well-educated person, and she was also very grande dame who liked good manners. So anybody that did not have good manners got, you know, this in her diary. But her diaries went to 1969. And apart from all the business things that I read from her diaries, so I got to know not only my family's personality, which she sometimes was very against what happened. Of course, I got to know her own personality. One slightly amusing thing that I saw in 1968 that she wrote about me. I was visiting her on one of the many occasions that I visited her, but I came with a girlfriend from school. And she said, Matteo and this girlfriend visited me, and we went to the Louvre, and we went to dinner here and there. He does not sleep in the same room as his girlfriend. So she was following etiquette till the very end of her life. Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, Matteo, I think we have some pictures that belong to your family.
If you press the button.
Shall we go through them?
Press the button, Petra. There we are.
That's black, and there we have
this is
the
Metz and Company,
Metz and Co.
The building of the store in Amsterdam, which in Amsterdam was very famous and still is a famous department store, especially as of the 20s, where designers were commissioned, and you have an enormous catalogue of famous names, or now famous names, like the Dutch architect and designer Rietveld, like people like Breuer, like Van der Rohe, like Wiener Werkstätte, Joseph Hoffmann. All these names were sold at Metz and Co. Later on, after the war. Italians like Gio Ponti, Paul Kjærholm, the furniture designer. Big names.
Some of them you can see in this exhibition.
And here in this exhibition, although we'll talk about that maybe later, but I wanted to show Sonia's work with regards to her work for Metz and Co., but a little association with some of her equals, painters and designers, such as Rietveld, you will see here, that were associated with the style, the Dutch movement that started in 1918, where you had Mondrian and where you had Van der Lek, where you have another painter called Hussar, which is represented here, Vordenberger Gildewart, who joined later on, and Georges van Tongerlo, who is also represented in this exhibition. But Metz and Company, my father sold it in 1973, but was really a mecca for avant-garde design in a luxurious context. But okay. I started, if you press one button.
Yeah, this is Jozef de Leeuw.
This is my grandfather.
Yeah, this is the man you told us that was...
that had a very good time with Sonia for many years.
Had a very good time with Sonia and asked her to marry him,
which she obviously did not do. She stayed with Robert, but they stayed very good friends. Countless visits, countless telephone calls, and they really worked on designs together as if they were making an objet d'art. It was a lot of care, and it was taken into establishing these designs.
I think we have to speed up a little. This
is my father in 1930, so he was 22 years old, wearing a Sonia Delaunay tie. So it's within the family. Here,
what we see here, that is something we can also see in the exhibition, but it was nice to show it here. This is a sole Sonia Delaunay exhibition in the Metz premises. On the rooftop, there is a little...
There was a cupola designed by Rietveld, which is actually a very famous landmark, on which you have the most famous view of Amsterdam. But you see here her fabrics, and Metz was really a company that promoted Sonia as a designer and established her work during many years.
Okay.
This is my father in 1950. For many years I thought he was wearing a Sonia tie there, but actually it is a Wiener Werkstätte tie. Also nice.
Okay, so...
But there we start. That is me with my mother in 1953 wearing a Sonia dress. I discovered this picture somewhere also, I think I the machine, but it shows that I've been seeing Sonia or her design for many years. The next one is, this is the view from the staircase when I was at the top of her atelier, and you can see down at these big plants. And there's a little bit to the left of this painting, there is a huge painting with big circles.
It's in the next.
It is there, here you see because there you see Sonia. This is in the late 70s already, with these I can't remember what it was called, the rythme coloré, I think, of Robert. But you can see Sonia was not a very tall lady, but how majestic these paintings were, and what you see it in black and white. But if you imagine it in color, you can understand what an enormous impact this made upon me.
Little guy you were.
I was a very little guy. That's the other way into her studio, and I'll briefly want to tell as well. Sonia did not, or Metz did not buy all from Sonia alone. Sonia also was furnished very often by Metz and Company, who delivered curtains and also her designs, but also chairs. She had Eames chairs and so on.
Okay.
So, yeah. This is a very amusing, tiny little picture which I found, I think, in the I don't know, with the washing powder probably. But this is Sonia Delaunay she's standing there totally on the right, but it is on the roof of the Rietveld cupola at Metz and Company at a 1951 exhibition, which was done at the time that she proposed this exhibition to my father. You see here the Rietveld zigzag chairs, the Rietveld zigzag table, and also a floor mat which Rietveld made with circles not uninspired by Sonia Delaunay. And right on the left is Nelly van Doesburg.
Oh, on the left, yeah.
Who was the wife of Theo van Doesburg, who was the founder of the style movement. And they were actually not only good friends, but really promoted her husband's work and got recognition for them. You see them there on the floor. It's tiny, but on the floor you see a Van der Leck.
Where is Sonia?
Rug.
Can you indicate her?
Sonia is, for you, on the right, wearing a handbag. Carrying a handbag. But you see, this picture is about 2 inches big, but you see the view that you can have over Amsterdam. There's a Rietveld buffet, and there's a Van der Leck rug, of which the design is
also
actually
in this
exhibited in this
exhibition.
exhibition. And there are actually, in the exhibition, there's also the chairs of Rietveld and the table of Rietveld. There you see her again with Nelly all the way to the left. This is they're really tiny little snapshots taken by my father.
Well, this is another picture. This is Sonia with
my father
with your
in
father?
1967 at the Musée National d'Art Moderne, where there was the big retrospective of her work.
At that time, she was really a celebrity, a well-known painter.
It was the first time the French did a big exhibition.
In '67.
Yeah, that was her
and
first
she was
breakthrough.
She was quite old by then. She was 75.
Yeah.
That was the first time the museums recognized her.
Yeah.
Okay.
She had actually her first big retrospective in Germany of, I won't say of all places, of Bielefeld, but where there was a huge retrospective, and that was really the starting point of her international recognition.
And Matteo, can you tell me about, when is this?
This is in 1966, when Sonia visited us at home with my father. It's difficult to see, but he's wearing a Sonia tie there. I must say, when I look at it now, they both look very Jewish, I must say. It's nice to see that. But she came often, and she described these things very well. This is also at a time that Sonia had given one of her most important paintings of 1958 to my family as a sort of apotheose of the friendship that she had with my grandfather and my parents. And it was hanging there for only a couple of months. There you see them.
There you see it.
There's my mother on the left, my father sporting his Delaunay tie, not looking very happy because I was always the photographer, which is why there are no pictures of me with Sonia, unfortunately. But that's the painting of 1958. It's a landmark in her work.
And when did your family, this was the occasion that it was...
That was well, it'd been hanging there for about 3 or 4 months. Sonia came, and my father was preparing an exhibition of her rugs, also at Metz and Company. So Metz really, throughout their lives, were involved with each other.
Okay.
I'll give a very, very short afternote on this, because I'm an opera singer. I'm not a rug manufacturer or a schmatte dealer or whatever. But Sonia was extremely important, but of course, for me, she was part of the family. So when you have access to somebody that is very famous, you're not always aware of the fact that some people do not have this access. And for me, she was like normal. We knew her. I looked her up. I saw her many times. But I never really realized how deep the friendship went with my father and my grandfather until my father died nearly 2 years before she did. And in 1978, just after my father died, I had a concert in Paris, and I of course looked up Sonia, who had just broken her collarbone and she was bedridden. But when I came there, she was crying and crying and crying. And it was painful for me to watch this. And her housekeeper said she's been crying like this for 3 weeks as if her son died. And I didn't realize that this friendship was so deep until 5 years later I started to work with Petra on her life, and I realized that this had been going on for 40, 50 years. And the result of this friendship, you see.
You can see here. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Matteo, thank you for sharing this with us. Okay. Well, very happy to hear this. Of course, I know the story of your family and the story of Sonia that combines with your family, but it's always nice and it's always beautiful to hear these kind of stories, and thank you for that. And now we'd like to go along with Elaine Lustig Cohen. Elaine, can you tell us how you got to know Sonia?
Excuse me. My husband and I, Arthur Cohen, were in Paris, and we were staying on a hotel on Rue de Bac. And there was a little gallery across the street, and it had abstract work in the window, and we thought it looked interesting, so we went in. And right before we had gone to Europe, I think in one of the galleries in New York, we'd seen paintings by Kupka. And when we went into this gallery, obviously she had a lot of interesting works, but we said to her, do you have anything by Kupka? And she said, no. And then we said, well, we understand Mrs. Kupka is still alive. Maybe you know her. And she said, you don't want to meet that awful lady. She said, if you like that kind of work, I have a friend around the corner.
Yeah.
And she called her friend, and that was Sonia.
Okay.
And we made an appointment and went the next day. And the interesting thing, because you were talking about Nellie Van Doesburg and Sonia, both of these ladies, unfortunately, Sonia did this for too long. When we met Sonia, she said to us, we said we wanted to see her work. And she said, no, you have to look at Robert's work first.
Okay.
She really felt that when he died, she was the only one that was able to give him...
To promote his work.
To promote his work. Anyway, we said, yes, we'll look. But we weren't really interested. Both my husband and I knew about Sonia because we knew about the 1925 show. And also at that time, I was a designer, a graphic designer. And many of the graphic design magazines at that time showed many people like Sonia, Rodchenko, long before we knew about their paintings, we knew about other things they did. So that was the first time, and we fell in love with Sonia, with her work.
And can you tell us, what was it in her work that you fell in love
Well,
with?
we fell
Do you have words for that?
Well, first of all, it's the color always with Sonia. That's always absolutely amazing. And also, it was the way she applied paint, especially when she did gouache and watercolor, that is, it's really very beautiful. I liked her work. I felt it was more spontaneous than Robert. Robert was an intellectual, obviously very controlling. The one story you didn't tell is about how she married Robert.
Yeah,
Because you mentioned that she was a very determined little girl.
absolutely.
So she was so determined that when she got to Paris and her uncle wanted her to come home, and she didn't want to come home, she was showing a few little works of hers at a gallery owned by a man by the name of Uda. Uda was German, and he was an art critic and had a small gallery, and he knew she didn't want to go back. And he was homosexual, but he said to her, "You want to stay in Paris? I'll marry you." And she said, "Okay." So she married him, and about a year later, Robert Delaunay came to paint Uda's picture. And he said, "You don't want her, I want her." And so
This is how it went.
This is how it went. I mean, these were the stories she used to tell Arthur or
She
myself.
told you, it went like that,
I remember her telling this. We became very, enthusiastic about Sonia. We tried with all the museums in New York, throughout the country, to get a big show here, and no one was interested. We continued to see her. Finally, in 1979, right before, she died in 79, but in 78, Albright Knox and Robert Buck decided to do an exhibition. And by the time it opened in 80, she was dead. We saw her almost every year through the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Yeah, can you also tell me, because your husband, Arthur Cohen, he was her first biographer. How did that start? How did he make this?
Because Arthur was furious that nobody wanted to give her a show. And my husband it was actually the first book he wrote about art. Because my husband was a theologian, a publisher, a novelist, you name it. Anyway, he decided he was going to do a book on Sonia. And so we would go often, and he would interview Sonia. Sonia and I talked in English. Arthur's French, my French is not very good. I mean, I understand, but I can't speak in French. Arthur spoke French very well, and so he interviewed her for many times, and they had long correspondence. There are many stories I have about Sonia. I'll tell you two of my favorites.
Shall we go through your pictures?
Because yes, we can do it with the pictures.
Yeah,
yes.
Shall I?
Okay, this is Sonia on her staircase. It's 1968, so she was in her 70s.
Who took this picture?
I took all the pictures.
All the pictures
and
that we see are yours.
unfortunately,
Okay.
I'm not in many of them. I'm in one or two because my daughter was also, when she was a teenager, was with us, and she took a picture of me. So you'll see
we'll see you two in this series. Okay, wonderful.
So this is Sonia on Rue Saint-Simon in her doubles. It was this amazing sunlit studio.
Yeah, it's like the same story that you told.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a picture you have that I have almost the same, but I have a picture of the staircase that you were on.
Okay, well, let's go to the next one.
Again, this is Sonia in front of all the plants. There were amazing amount of plants, but it was really beautiful. It was I guess, it's one of these double-story studio windows.
Yeah.
I mean, there are still some in New York, but that's what this
Yeah.
was. And we stayed many times in the hotel next door, which is the Hotel
Okay.
Saint-Simon, yeah.
Simon.
Yeah.
Now, this
That's-
is my
that's the
husband,
thing, yeah.
Arthur, with Sonia in the 60s. And this was a staircase, and it went up to a tiny little bedroom. With,
Is this the next one?
I think it may be the next,
No, not yet.
no.
No.
Okay, that's Sonia in the 60s.
May I just say something of the previous picture where
Yes.
you see Sonia over the balustrade? That is
Yes.
exactly where I nearly fell down the
Well,
stairs.
that's right.
Yeah.
And this piece, I can't remember who did this, but it's Sonia kept up, by the way, with what was going on in the art world in the 60s and 70s. And I can't, this is somebody not well known, but
No.
it's a kind of style.
Yeah,
piece.
but it's not
Yeah.
Van Tongelo.
No, it definitely not, no.
Okay.
And then the next picture is just Sonia,
Yeah.
again, in,
That was
okay, and
60s.
this is in the studio.
This is in the studio.
By the way, the studio, she worked in the studio on small things, but there was a room next to the apartment
Yeah.
where she did the big oils.
Okay.
Because
That came
later. That came later.
She bought the
She bought
apartment.
the- right.
She was successful. She bought the apartment next door later on.
Okay. Oh,
But
I didn't
this-
know that.
When you saw her standing over the balustrade there,
Right.
that was actually,
That's what-
you
what you
came
saw.
into, it was not much larger than it was here.
That's right.
And over there was what you see here, which is where she worked. And here was a round table where one always had tea. And later on, her bed came, when she
That's
was a nurse, her bed was here. But it was not, I mean, now you'd just die to have an apartment like that. But it was not huge.
No, it was not huge,
At all.
no.
Okay. Let's see if we have this. No, not
Yeah.
yet. There is a picture of this bedroom of hers, but
There is a picture, I
Okay.
think. And by the way, you mentioned her sitting with the paintbrush when she was quite old. The last time I saw her, she wasn't using a paintbrush, but she had magic markers.
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
And she
Really?
was
She's
still
doing it, yes.
doing it with magic markers.
Magic
Even
markers.
in bed.
In bed, right,
Yeah.
right.
She
Even
couldn't
in
stop.
bed.
And the
She couldn't
bed,
stop
the
painting.
bed had, you'll see, it's a little bit of an American quilt on it. Now, this is just another picture of one of the small, the table
Yeah.
in the studio
Yeah.
that she did small pieces.
Well,
This
look
is the
here.
bedroom.
This is her bedroom.
And it really is just a dresser and a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was behind that little room
Yeah,
that you,
right.
you could, you
And it's
could
at the
come
top
into.
of the
Yeah.
staircase, right.
On top
Yeah.
of the staircase.
Okay, and then
Mind you, I didn't spend very much time in her bedroom, just to make that clear.
the next picture is
Okay.
my husband Arthur, my daughter, and Sonia, sometime like I guess it's
This is-
76.
76. This is still the time that Arthur Cohen was writing her.
This is the,
her
well, Arthur's book came
biography.
out, well, Arthur's book came out in 75.
75. So
I
this is
think
maybe a
early.
year
This is-
after.
This is early.
No, this is earlier. This is
Yeah.
early 70s.
Early 70s. You can tell because of your daughter's age.
Well, I guess Tamar's about 14, 15. I don't know. We'll have to ask her. Well, we can tell by Arthur's haircut.
Okay. Oh yeah. Here.
And here's just Arthur and Sonia discussing something, I'm not quite sure.
No.
And
yes.
then we have one of, okay.
We can go back if you have something to say about this.
No, the next part I have a lot to say about. Because
Okay.
this was one of the most amazing
Yeah.
experiences
Who
I
do we
had.
see here? Sonia in front.
Sonia and me in the back.
And that's you,
I
okay.
have, again, one of those Sassoon haircuts. Sonia, well, I should tell you first that at the time we knew Sonia in the 70s, she would hire a Rolls Royce. I don't know whether it was once or twice a week. Twice a week, I didn't remember. And she would take us on this incredible ride. First, we would go, or last, I don't know, we would go to the Bois de Boulogne, Then we would drive down Boulevard Malesherbes, where she and Robert lived. And then we would drive under the Eiffel Tower. That was the best. This day, she said to us, we're going to have lunch in the country. We're going to go to Robert's grave, and then we're going to the house that we owned that I don't believe he ever lived in, but
Well, yes, he did.
He did,
Yeah,
for a short,
He did,
yeah.
just before the end of the 30s.
right.
Yeah.
So here,
In Gambé.
right,
Yeah.
in Gambé. This picture my daughter took of me and Sonia arriving at the cemetery in Gambé. And the next picture shows Sonia bending down and rearranging the roses. As we left Paris, what happened was we stopped and bought, I think they were like gigantic, long stem roses. And we got to the cemetery, and the chauffeur is helping her. And we went to Robert's grave. Robert's grave is a helise. I'm sure you all know what a helise is that Robert did. It's if you take a line at an angle and then you draw half circles around it. So the grave is a bronze tablet. And my husband took these roses and he put them down like that. And Sonia could hardly move, and she bent down, picked up the roses, and put them at an angle. Then we went for lunch, and then we went to the house. And the next pictures are, well, that's
Here we
where,
see the
here we
roses.
see Sonia put the roses down at an angle. It's hard to see the helise, though.
You can just see R. Delaunay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
that's the
right.
gravestone on the tomb. Yeah. Shall I go to the next?
Yeah, because it's all the, oh no, okay.
No?
This, well, we went to the house in the country and we were having a talk with her grandson. I don't remember which.
Jean-Louis.
Jean-Louis.
Or Eric, probably, it was Eric. But it's not
It doesn't matter. Anyway, so I was taking pictures, I was wandering around, and I went into the barn. Well, no one had been in the barn, I don't think, for years, and I found two things. One was this was a piece of fabric. This was a chair with Sonia's fabric on it. And the other piece that I found, well, I have pictures of it, but it's very difficult to see. In their apartment in Paris, when Mayakovsky came to visit them, and by the way, the Delaunays were friends with everybody, Zara, Apollinaire, you name it. Mayakovsky painted on this canvas that was on the door,
Yeah.
and it had ended up in the barn. It was practically destroyed. Anyway, we brought both things back to Paris, and they were both restored.
Do you know where they are now, these
At-
doors?
Yeah, they're at the Beaubourg.
Beaubourg,
Yeah.
okay.
Because they restored them. I mean, another problem with Sonia and why enough people didn't know her was because she ended up giving museums all the work, or most of it.
I can tell you stories
All right,
why.
okay,
but,
Okay,
may I
okay.
say something to this chair? Because this is,
Yes,
this is
I
very
recognize the
amusing.
chair. You
Because there was an exhibition of the UAM in 1930 at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, where at the same time Sonia was showing, had done the interior of a room with a panel with a curtain which is slightly snake-like, a little bit like a beautiful scarf that is being made or being produced now by Cooper-Hewitt for this exhibition. You see that there, and you see two chairs, and that
Yeah.
looks
That
very
looks
much
like
like
one of
one
them.
of them.
Well, it was
And
in
I
the
didn't
barn.
even know that this was until about an hour ago that this still existed.
There
at
it
the
was,
time.
in the barn.
Is it still? Does it still exist? you
Yeah,
think?
she gave them to
To
I
the
think,
Beaubourg.
To the Beaubourg.
Aha, okay.
Really?
Because
I
I've,
didn't-
I've
I know
never
we
seen the
brought
chair
them-
since,
we
so for
brought
me
it-
it's nice to discover
Yeah, but the
something.
Beaubourg never shows her work. Or hardly ever. Anyway, that's another story.
That's another story.
That's 5 stories.
Okay, I know. The next
Next
one
one.
is, that's me and Sonia sitting in the garden of the house in the country. And the next one is, I think, Arthur, my daughter, and Sonia sitting in the garden.
Yeah.
And
What kind of things were you discussing, you think?
Oh.
Do you remember? Is it
no.
No. About art or about the story
Maybe
of
it
her
was
life?
just
or-
about lunch. No.
I
Yeah.
hope you talked about food,
It was
because that
about
was
lunch.
a big thing in Sonia's
A big
life.
thing in
Well,
her
the
life.
You can see also at the end of her life, she's getting a bit bigger.
The end of the
Certainly here.
right, and the end of the story of the ride in the Rolls Royce, we always ended up at the same restaurant,
Right.
Madame Recamier.
Okay.
So that's just, we're sitting in the garden. There was after lunch, who knows what we were talking. And the next one is probably, it's again, the garden with Sonia, me, and Arthur. And I'm not, that may be the wife of one of the sons. Or no, I don't know who that is.
No, because the
No, the boys.
No, they didn't have wives.
They didn't have wives,
No.
that's right. By the other, did you know Charles?
Yes,
Ellen?
yes.
I've always wondered about Charles. He wasn't really interested in his mother's work, was he?
Well, there's certain sides. Actually, her son worked also in her, for her or with her in the around 1933, 1934. He was actually quite a gifted drawer, and
Oh.
he sometimes put in what's the exact word of it? If you make a design and you make exactly the correct repeat, and he sometimes did that for her. I know that
Okay.
from the
Oh,
diaries.
I didn't know that. But he was a jazz expert.
But he was
Jazz
actually
expert.
interested in
In
jazz,
jazz.
as indeed Sonia was.
Yeah.
And he was her only son,
Yes.
He was the only son. 1911
Right.
was born.
And the next one is.
what's happening now?
No, I think. No, there's.
No, we're not having it.
I think,
Okay.
is that it? Maybe.
No,
I think
that's
that's the end.
No, there must also be about this painting. What is it again?
No, the painting,
Let me see.
they didn't do. You mean the one?
Let me see if I can change this because it's not nice.
Whilst you're looking for a picture, I'll tell something about the Rolls-Royce rides, which were very, I mean, you obviously were in them, I was in them.
That's the beginning.
It's Sonia, who was very much grande dame. She was quite wealthy because as of the 60s, things were actually going very well. It's not entirely true that she was not having exhibitions because
No, but not in France.
no, she had things in France. In '64 she had big exhibitions, '67 big exhibition, but she was very well established. And as of late '60s, when she had met Jacques Damas, who was editing her work, who was promoting her, who was her manager, her designs came on pillowcases and sheets and all
You have
that.
one.
So there was a lot. Sonia became big business, but she liked to. She liked good manners, and she had this big Rolls Royce with a livreed chauffeur. Also, I think it was dark red. If I
don't remember.
and she would indeed. It's nice because we had the same rides, and there was always one place at the Bois de Boulogne where she stopped and she looked at the view. She adored my mother, by the way. My mother was working at Metz and Co, and she liked working women. She did not like not working women. And once she was in the Rolls Royce with my mother, and she said to my mother, "Gina, your hair looks terrible. Now we have to go to the hairdresser." But my mother said, "I have no time. I'm driving you." Told the driver, "Go to Alexandre," or whoever did her hair at the time. Stop there. My mother said, "Well, I don't even have money for this on me. Please." She opened the window, called out Alexandre, and said, "Do her hair." And that was it.
Wow.
My mother was pushed out of the Rolls Royce, and Sonia went on.
So a very determined
Very determined.
Well,
You had to
old
do what she
lady,
said.
as she was a little girl.
There's one other story she told, which I've always loved, is there's a famous picture of Sonia with her cat. I think it was an Angora cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And Arthur always loved that picture, and he said to her one day, "Sonia, what happened to the cat?"
Oh.
And she said, "The cat died." And Arthur said, "Well, why don't you get another cat?" And she said, "One cat, one husband."
Well, when the cat died, there was like a funeral for the
I'm
cat.
sure.
It was,
Really?
oh,
And
yes.
only
yes,
one
yes,
cat,
that
and
was-
only
that
one-
was- yeah.
Only one cat. And one son.
And one son,
And 2 grandsons.
and 2
grandsons.
grandsons. But one of them is,
And one is not longer with us.
right.
She was not an easy mother-in-law, so they didn't see the grandchildren. It was difficult. Sonia it's another side of her character. She was very determined, and she liked things to go her way. So if somebody didn't like her way, she would not make life easy.
for you.
But she was actually wonderful with me because I was,
You were a working woman.
well, but no, not only that, but in the 50s and 60s, I was a graphic designer. And then I went back to start to paint.
Yeah.
And of course, that was very difficult because painters didn't take me seriously because I was a designer. But Sonia was very encouraging. But she always said to me, you got to live long enough.
And she
And
did.
she did.
And she did.
And she did.
And
Yeah.
it is actually it's extraordinary to see somebody able to enjoy her success. Sonia was very generous too. She helped a lot of people, but she liked the idea that she made it. And that's a wonderful feeling for any artist to be able to enjoy your success. Not only because you live long enough, but because she saw recognition in all the stages of her life. First of all for her husband, because she really promoted him for many years and took a step back. And then when that was established, as in the 50s that started, her life really bloomed. And she continued what Robert had stopped, but often the comparison is made, who is better, who is this. When I'm sure when you met Sonia, you probably heard the same that I always heard when I would meet ladies the age of my parents. Well, yes, Sonia Delaunay, of course, her husband was much better, and she
Sure,
was.
they always said that.
And this went on for a very long time. And I know her work, not only her fabric designs, which I really know very well, but I know her paintings very well. And you see, not only there's a big difference, but you see the enormous power and strength that she had and determination in her colors, especially as of the 50s. Which is a great feeling.
People say, it really always makes me very unhappy because if you show someone a Schwitters from 1938 or 40, they always say, oh, a late Schwitters. It's a ridiculous statement. And,
Yes,
they would do that with Sonia.
Yeah.
The test with Sonia and her husband, just one little thing, is that I often, because it bothered me, and I never knew Robert, and I liked Sonia, so I was always for Sonia and against anybody that was against Sonia. But if I would do the test and I would have a painting of Robert next to a painting of Sonia, and I asked which one is made by Robert, which one is made by Sonia, the people that didn't know, they always chose the painting by Sonia, saying that was done by Robert.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Okay. At this moment, I'd like to ask the audience. I think there are a lot of people in the audience who also have known Sonia. Perhaps there are questions. Perhaps there are people who have something to add to what we have heard. I see someone there. Oh, several hands. And there is a microphone coming to you. So please introduce yourself. Tell your name. And, say what you have to say.
Hello, I'm Andrea. I just had a question. Why was it so difficult for her to be shown, like, when she was younger? Like, why, what was the barrier?
You mean in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States or even earlier, because she was making art for so long and making dresses.
You
for
mean
so long.
that she only got her shows when she was an old age and in the 1960s? Maybe you can tell something about it, Elaine.
We should ask Sherry Buckborough, who is here.
Sherry is
Who
Sherry
did the
Buckborough.
first show of Sonia at Albright Knox in 1980.
Sherry, do you have a microphone? Is it over there? So the question is, why didn't she have shows of her own work before, in the 1960s?
Yeah, it's a big question, but certainly the fact that she did so much of the design work that we see upstairs for such a long time worked to her detriment, because she became known as a designer, and it was difficult for her to be taken seriously by a lot of painters. And that was also a time, I would just mention this to Matteo. I was thinking about it when I saw the show upstairs a little while ago, that when we did the show that opened in 1980, I had wanted very much to include a whole lot of this design work, because I think it is really so beautiful, and to have the textiles flowing every place. And Bob Buck, who was the head of the museum, said, no, we can't do that. It won't be taken seriously. We need big paintings. So in actual fact, we had to sort of manufacture a lot of an exhibition that would take up the wall space of a major museum. That was a big part of it. I mean, if you wanted a show that was going to make a mark, you had to have you had to be able to take up wall space at that particular period of time. I don't think that's the case now at all. It's also. Yeah,
I think it's broken down now because people work in all medias.
Oh, absolutely.
But I would say it's a very short time. It's maybe 10, 15 years.
Yes, absolutely. That
it's
long ago, it would have been not easy at all to do this
easy.
kind of show in the United States.
Right.
May I just add one little thing, is that Sonia's obviously painted up till 1920 approximately, a little bit before. Then she really stopped. There are no paintings. And although it's often said that when she closed her studio in 1929, 1930, she dedicated herself only to painting. It's even, with permission, written in your book. This is also something that Sonia very much later on tried to promote, making her biography as if she would continue to paint. But that is not true. This explains also why there are hardly any paintings as of 1924 to 1936 is really the time she really started to paint, and 1938 that she started to make abstract paintings. Then obviously there was a war in between where there was very little done for various reasons. As of 46, she really started to paint herself again, but earned her living with fabric designs. But it took about 5-6 years to promote her husband's work. So obviously she was always a step behind, why nobody thought of doing a show on her. So it took really till the late 50s to her to be established as a painter. And all the people that were from Guggenheim or like Hila von Rehbein that got a little bit of Robert, but she wasn't really interested in his later period, only in his very early period. So it's obvious that she wasn't really there. Her great time started in the 60s.
But there was an earlier time,
And
in other words, 13, 14.
yes, but she never sold these pictures.
No, I know,
So
but she was really.
She was not in the she was
No.
wonderful. I'm not doubting
oh,
that.
okay.
Oh no,
Yeah.
it's great. But she never sold a picture, and Robert very little. So
Could I just add that the fact that she was a woman was probably
no.
No.
No. And I'd like to add, Sonia was not a woman's liber, and she did not. People obviously like to. No, because she was in a world, I mean, she was in a man's world, but she was also known in this man's world. And there were many, there was of the Russians, like Goncharova, there was Popova, there was...
They already had their exhibitions, you mean?
And they had their exhibition, but she didn't, at this major time, between 35 and 55, she didn't really paint. So there wasn't really that much to show. There were some paintings of, I mean, I know them, of 1938. I know these very well, but it took a long time. So before being established, that takes a while. I mean, you don't get a show at the MoMA, just like that. Some people do, maybe, but
Matteo,
things happen differently then.
I'm going to take issue with you, Matteo. I think that her reputation really did, that her reputation was able to take advantage of the feminist movement.
Yes,
I think
that
there's
is
no
that is
doubt.
true.
That is true.
That
That's
is
true.
absolutely
Yeah.
true.
Because
That's
there were so
absolutely
many
true.
artists who are art historians who went and interviewed her.
Yes,
Her publication,
that's-
she was hallowed as one of the,
Yes.
one of the grand dames, and museums were forced to take more interest in women artists
Yeah.
by the end of the 70s.
But she was by then a very grand
Oh, certainly.
old lady, and of course it's very nice to use somebody for this. But knowing from her diaries, where there are discussions with all sorts of people, where she says women should also learn how to do housekeeping, and
Yes,
that's
yes,
what they
yes.
should learn too, apart from getting a job and working. But she did not want to. She was used for it, and she was very well managed. So she was presented, but from her own personality,
Right.
she was very much establishment, but wonderful to use for this purpose.
So
But
to
she
yeah?
did not burn her bra.
No, fortunately she didn't. But to answer your question, you have been answered, I think. So it was partly an economic reason that she didn't paint for such a long time, because she had to earn the income of her family. And the other and after in the 50s and 60s, she was able to paint again. Also starting in the 30s, mid-30s. So then she had enough work apparently to show. But the other thing is what you said, Sherry, about this feminist movement. It took some years before museums would be interested to have a woman painter having a solo show. So those are two reasons that answer your question. Is there another question?
I remember in the 70s was the women's movement, and I remember being so knocked out by her Belle de Beaulieu of 1913.
Can you maybe say your name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And
She was a woman artist who really explored things first. She was a first in so many ways. The Belle de Beaulieu was the most amazing painting. I think I was knocked out by that. I had seen it in the Museum of Modern Art in Paris in 1972.
And the Belle Beaulieu is from 1913.
1913.
Yes, so
And-
that's a very
but
early
the
work.
point was that I saw this painting, and I had had a lot of art training. I never knew this woman. This woman was
Yeah.
not publicized anywhere in any of our art books in this country.
Mhm.
And I looked at it, and had been a dancer, and I saw the painting, and I felt like I was part of the painting. I was moving with
Yeah.
the bodies, which were very abstract.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked and I saw Sonia Delaunay, 1913. I said, oh my God, here was a woman who was doing this in 1913, which was amazing. And also in that year, she did the prose,
Transsibérien.
Transsibérien painting, which was words and color.
No, she didn't do the words.
No, but I'm saying it was
Oh.
putting together words with color.
Yeah, and
color. And color and as emotion and thought and feeling. And it was an amazing piece of work. You
But
own
may-
that. You own that, don't you, Elaine? And
you know, they printed 150 sheets with the text. And then they put about color, because they couldn't sell them, and they threw away most of the sheets.
amazing,
And they sold about probably 30, 40.
amazing.
It's amazing.
But
May
it
I-
was
may
such
I-
an amazingly original work.
Yeah.
To put
Well,
such
it's-
and
Her early
My-
work is incredible.
Her early work is
Her early
incredible.
work is
The
incredible.
early work is
Yeah.
incredible.
It is wonderful.
incredibly original.
But
for the
the
time.
first time it was exposed in exhibition again was in 1958 in Bielefeld. So obviously
It took all
it
those
took.
years for that to be appreciated.
But she
And you pity that.
wasn't paid.
It's a
but,
pity, you say, that
It's
you
such a
didn't.
sadness,
Yeah.
but it's also because she was a woman.
But I don't think
No,
I don't
no,
think it
I
is.
don't
I
think
don't think
so.
it is. It's not sad at all because Sonia had her life the way it went, and we would not been sitting here if she maybe had been painting all those 20 years, and people got fed up with it already in the 30s.
And,
so
and
maybe.
they say it's a late Sonia.
Yeah, and they say it's
Yeah.
late Sonia.
But I guess
But the other thing that no one's talked about is those early works.
the quilt.
No.
No,
The
no.
early works, the ones 1908 through
Yes.
before the Russian Revolution.
Before she met Robert, you mean?
No. She was married to Robert, and they went to Portugal because of the war.
Oh, that.
And the fact that they had enough money. Why did they have enough money? Because the uncle
Was providing her
Was
with
was
providing
providing
with
with
all the
money, and then
Yep.
came the Russian Revolution. That was the end of it.
I'd like to say something
that's when
about
she
that
started
of her
to-
not being known here, because this should not be in this room without this comment. Because of your husband, certainly Sonia was being sold and being presented already
But it
in
was,
the 60s.
but it was. Look, it's a small group.
But there were galleries here that were doing her work. The most important thing is, I don't know exactly the date anymore. When was Nixon? 72 till
74.
74, 72, 74. When Nixon was here and you had Pompidou, the president of France, so that was early mid 70s. They, as one of the big gifts of a state gift to America, they gave one of the most gorgeous of her paintings of 1967, I think it is 1968, to Richard Nixon or to the United States. I think it's in Washington in the, I don't know which museum or which, yeah.
It may be in the White House collection.
It's all white, meaning that already then it really meant a lot. So one shouldn't say that she was sort of on the sideline in those days. She was already very acknowledged and very in, and very protégée, very protected by Pompidou's wife.
that's-
Sonia,
Okay, that's interesting.
Sonia
Can we,
was,
maybe there's someone with another question, because we have still
I'm
10
Gail
minutes.
Levin. I'm an art historian, and I, as a graduate student, was fortunate enough to interview Sonia twice in 75 and 76. And I also put her in a show that I did on synchronism and American color abstraction in 1978, which was at the Whitney Museum. I had the Belle Bouillet painting from Bielefeld in the show, and the prose du temps sibérien, and other works. Had both work by her and Robert, which was very unusual at the Whitney. In any event, I wanted to ask both of the guests a question, and I don't know if you have anything to add here, but did Sonia express to either of you at any time any aspect of her Jewish identity and roots, and particularly her experience during World War II? Thank you.
Well,
Well, the
okay. Can you answer?
We're both Jewish, so that, the Jewish part, I don't know, she may have talked to Arthur about that in French. But the other, you were asking about, I'm sorry, World War, yes,
World
well,
War II.
we all spoke about that, because she fled with Robert to Grasse, and she was with the Arps. And there's another woman connected with Mr. Arp that probably none of you have seen many of her works, and that's Sophie Tauber,
yeah.
who's one of the great women artists, and you never, it's only in,
And a trained textile designer.
yeah,
But
and fortunately in the Dada show at MoMA, they had a really interesting wall with Sophie. Anyway, yes, she discussed that part, of fleeing, and she also told us about when she came back to Paris, nothing seemed to have been disturbed in her apartment, even though I think people stayed there. And the other experience that I remember having is one day when we were with Sonia, a man, I don't remember his name, came to Sonia because he had bought a painting from Sonia in the 20s, and it had been stolen during the Nazi period. And he was bringing this photograph of the painting so Sonia could identify it, because he had then found it in a French museum and he wanted it back.
Yeah, okay.
And he got it back finally. But those are the only things I remember, and you probably...
But do you think that this Jewishness played an important role in her life? Did she talk about it?
Yes and
in
no.
what way?
I did not have discussions about her Jewishness, but of course I knew this. When I read her diaries, and she, of course, a lot became clearer in her own sort of autobiography, which she did in conjunction with Jacques Damas, who managed her. She spends a lot of time, a lot of a chapter really dedicated to the period in the war. About her Jewishness, it was so not known that even her son, Charles, did not know that his mother was Jewish. So when they escaped Paris or fled Paris, I think even on the 11th of May in 1940, exactly the same time that my father happened to be in Paris, was not able to go back to Holland because the war had broken out and escaped to America. They went to the southern part of France, which one later was not part of the occupied zone. But obviously in her passport it still said Sophie Stern, so it's not a non-Jewish name, shall we say. So when you have to present it anywhere, then obviously it was apparent that she was Jewish. And she was obviously afraid that this would come out, but this was never a thing that was discussed. So she never thought of herself as a Jewish painter. I know also that many curators would sometimes like to push her in this corner, but that was not her, as much as we sometimes would like her to be that. But this was not her thing.
Do you think that first of all, the family that was rich in St. Petersburg who brought her up, they probably were Jewish, but
they were Jewish,
okay,
but they were what was at the time very assimilated.
Right.
They were not very religious, or
but probably
they were well connected. But
probably she never forgave her mother. She said that she never forgave her mother.
Well, the reason she hated her mother was that her mother was a complainer, and if there's something she couldn't stand was complaining.
Yeah, but she also gave her away. I mean, she sent her away. I think that has a lot to do with it.
I'm afraid that the millions of questions I would have liked to ask Sonia now about that time, but I think mother or no mother, all I heard from her, she disliked her mother intensely. One can make the psychology that she was given away, but I don't think we would have had this exhibition here if her mother had not given her away. So
absolutely,
I think
but we're not her. I mean, I don't know.
I never heard that story about her mother in that respect, that her mother had given her away. But she told you this herself.
Well, what she said was that she put it as, I never saw my mother again. Mm-hmm. I saw my father once, but that was not a good experience for her. And
he came to Paris?
That I don't remember. I don't remember where she saw him. I'm sure he came.
She never went to Russia.
She never went back.
No,
she never went back.
May I just add one little thing, because the Jewishness is not unimportant. I don't want to sort of put it under the carpet, but every artist and every person have their secrets, and sometimes you don't want to give away these secrets, and I think this was part of her as well, that she did not want to be put into a corner.
Okay.
Yes, but you can't blame her. Look at history that she was living through.
No, but this was even before things happened, because what I found astonishing, that in the 30s, in '33, when people started to come out of Germany and go to Paris. Many of the writers, many of the musicians, many of the painters that she knew, that she corresponded with. It's something she never really mentioned, that they had to emigrate, that they were kicked out. That was accepted, but the Jewish bit she never discusses anywhere.
You don't find it in her diaries.
I
mentioning
bet
it.
that my husband talked to her about it, but I don't know about it. I mean, I can't believe my husband, who is a theologian, who is so involved, would not have just. But I don't know.
It's impossible. He didn't talk about it.
I don't know.
It's a lot easier to talk about it 30, 40 years later than to talk about it now. But she didn't discuss this very much.
I'd like to see if there's another question. I saw several hands, and it's 8 o'clock.
In that respect, I'm just wondering if she had a friendship with Chagall.
Can we have a microphone here?
In following the question about her Jewishness in Russia, I wondered if she had any friendship with Chagall.
So she knew Chagall.
Yeah, but
but
there
they
was
were not.
no.
They were not
It was
good
not
friends.
among her
No,
intimate
I
friends.
can't imagine Sonia and Chagall together. Never.
And Chagall's Jewishness, as opposed to Sonia's Jewishness, that's really
Two worlds.
But
different
there's
ways.
color involved.
yes.
Yeah,
yes,
but
yes.
the different kind of color. Yeah.
Okay.
Not sentimental color.
Perhaps over there.
Actually, this discussion has raised a question I never had before. I'm Jan Castro. I curated a show on Sonia Delaunay called Sonia Delaunay La Moderne at 4 museums in Japan and at the Zimmerle at Rutgers. And Sherry Buckborough's book was my introduction to Sonia, and again, for which I'm very grateful. So the question that's arisen is this. Rick Burns has pointed out that Andy Warhol was strongly influenced by his Eastern Orthodox Catholic, his Eastern Orthodox upbringing, and the icons that he saw in his childhood in growing up in an American ghetto, Polish ghetto. And so what about the influence of icons on Sonia? Someone once told me, and I've never even checked it out, that Sonia did have some kind of an icon over her bed. And again, the Eastern Orthodox images that she might have seen in Russia, and also Serge Diaghilev had an avant-garde magazine which she read avidly when she was in Paris and she had strong correspondence with her Russian friends in Paris. So I think the interconnections, I'm just asking it as a question.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about this icon above her bed. It's something I really can't answer that question. But I do remember that Robert has written about his wife, about Sonia, and he said that she had an atavistic feeling for color, of which he thought that it came from Russia. That she had another feeling for color, the kind of colors that she maybe remembered from her childhood in southern Russia. Which has another light, other colors than what she saw in St. Petersburg, and also what she saw in Paris. And maybe that's what she brought to Paris, and something she recognized in the light of Spain and Portugal. That's what she wrote about it. That is the colors of her Russian childhood that she found back, and I think that she perhaps in this way used in her work. It was something in her subconsciousness. But as for the icon part, that part of the Russian tradition, I'm not sure. I don't know that. Maybe you know something about it.
But she did do in the 70s something called icon, if I'm yeah. So I mean that certainly is it's an influence. You see also the Russian influence or the peasant art influence in some of the fabric designs you see, very much so. on one little note on her Jewishness before making that too long. But when Sonia was buried, and I was at her burial, which is a far too long story to tell here now, but to my great amazement, that was in Gambais, where Robert's grave is too, and it all took place in a church with a lady sitting at an organ singing very out of tune on a very out of tune organ, but it was what one calls kind of Catholic. So this always surprised me, because for me Sonia was Jewish, but that must have been someone's wish, maybe just a family, but that was it. Strange.
I think we're about to stop this conversation.
Well, we can have maybe one or two more questions.
Okay. I saw someone with a hand a very long time over there. Maybe that's okay. And then to her, and then to that lady. And I think then we have to finalize this.
Is there no man in this room that asks a question?
Gave me the mic. It's a very quick question about this beautiful hat and scarf that you were wearing, Ms. Cohen. Could you tell us about it?
The hat I made when there was a memorial service at the Gray Art Gallery. The Sonia Delaunay show went from Albright Knox to the Gray Art Gallery in 1980. And there was a memorial service because she had died December 5th, 1979. And so I made the hat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just an ordinary felt hat, and I sewed things on it. The scarf is an edition of Sonia's that was done in 71.
It's in of Liberties, isn't it?
No.
No?
No,
This is not Liberties.
I think it's done by Arcueil.
I think it's
Okay.
Arcueil.
No, it's...
No, it's not.
It's not
No.
Arcueil, but it's
I don't remember.
it's one of the early 70s, but it's a very nice one.
Right.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So this is a Sonia Delaunay,
And that's
this is a Lustig Cohen, inspired by Sonia Delaunay. Okay, may I have one last question over there?
Yes, I was wondering, I guess you talked a lot about her relationship to the art world, and you didn't really talk much about her relationship to maybe other textile designers, and was she in a community of people who were designing textiles? Was she interested in the history of textiles, ethnic textiles, anything like that?
If we have 3 more hours, we can give a lecture on that.
Well, she did have connections with several textile designers. You mentioned already Sophie Torber-Arp, who was an artist and a textile designer. But I think that for her, she stood alone in her designs. For her, it was designing or painting was one and the same thing. Yeah, it was the same thing.
She published a book, now I can't remember, is it 27 or 28? I think there is a copy of it here, where in fact she introduces Albers and all Bauhaus people, all sorts of contemporaries.
It's in the exhibition.
She was very well aware of other artists doing the same thing, and she knew a lot of them, obviously, too. So she was not an isolated person in any way. To the contrary, she was very much involved with meeting other people, being part of other people. But she was the one that made the textile designs, and we're talking of 20s and 30s. I presume that's the period that you're talking about.
Yeah.
She certainly knew them. Yeah.
But the same thing.
And Goncharova and Popova and all the
Yes,
Russians she knew. There are minor designers as well, like Mansurov, whom she protected for many years, who, as a matter of fact, did a lot of designs for Metz and Company as well. But she knew, she was very, very well connected in many ways, not only in craft ways, but
still she was very autonomous in that respect.
Absolutely.
Also in her fashion, her fashion designs. If you compare it to the Paris fashion world, she has a place of her own. And of course she knew about Chanel, of course she knew of Madame Vionnet and many others, but I don't think she really had connections with them. She knew her own place and she did her own thing. And I think that's really what Sonia did.
Later on in her late life, she wore Chanel's. So,
always.
Always.
Yeah.
And she had one very nice dress of Hubert de Givenchy. There was one picture of it there.
Okay,
but
she
was
that.
Chanel, yes.
Yeah.
And there was one other lady called Lola Prussac. She wore things of hers as well. But
it was always that little jacket, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The gold button.
Yes.
With the gold buttons. Okay, so that's Sonia in her Chanel. I think we are at the end of this evening. We've heard a lot about Sonia Delaunay.